Now that we know about React hooks and specifically about the useState React hook, we are ready to tackle our problem. See, we have this canC variable here, which we are changing its value through this function that gets fired when we change the value of the checkbox, when we click on the checkbox. And then what we want is that we want to display some text depending on the value of the canC variable. But as we just learned, since we want to have the UI re-render when we change the value of this canC variable, then we have to use a state. So let's go up here and let me delete this, and I will say const destructuring canC set canC equal to use state control dot to import useState from React, and I will pass the default value for the canC variable, which is false. Now, as you can see here, it says that we cannot assign to canC because it is a constant. This is great because this lets us know that we're making a mistake. Remember that in order to update the state variable canC, we have to use the setCanC function. So let me say here setCanC, and I will pass canC like this. We are negating canC. And that's actually it. With this, we are good to go. I can save. Let me go back to Google Chrome. And now we have here, you are not allowed to see. I will check this checkbox, and aha. We can see that now the change gets reflected. Now we're seeing, you are seeing the secret. And if I click again, we get the old message. And if I click again, you can see that I can toggle between the messages. This is great. This means that now we can update the UI depending on an action that occurs in our component. And not only that, we can do more. For example, let's say that I want to write something here like Felipe, and I want to have Felipe written here below this message that we have here. We can do that. Well, first, remember that since we want to have a variable that will change when we are updating this input type text, and we want to reflect that change in the UI, we need to use a state. So let's come here and let's say const, I will name it text, set text, use state, and the default value will be an empty string. Now I can come here to this handle key up, and I can say set text, and I can pass current target value. Now this text state variable will get updated when we change the value of our input type text. And now I can come down here, I can put it in a div, for example, and inside of this div I can put a JSX expression to put here the text variable. Now I can save, and I can go back to Google Chrome, and now if I write Felipe, you can see that at the same time what I am typing here, Gavilan, gets written here at the bottom of our component, which means that indeed we are using a state in order to be able to update the UI of our component in response to an event. And let us remember that we mentioned that React uses the virtual DOM, which allows React to make updates in the most efficient manner. Let me press F12 and let's go to Elements. Let me click on here and hover here so that you can see that we have this div. We also have that you are not allowed to see, and so on. If I start writing here, you are going to see that only this div gets updated. It is not like the entire UI gets updated, because that will be inefficient. what is happening is that React sees that the only thing that is changing here is this text state variable that we have here, and therefore only this div is the one changing its value. In a previous video, we saw that we could use the ternary operator so that when we click on this checkbox, we change this value that we have here, and then we could uncheck the checkbox and we were back at the original message. Now that is cool, but there are only two options here. Either we show this message or this message, but there is nothing else that we can do, which is kind of limiting because sometimes we want to have several choices and several outputs depending on those choices. For that we can use if-else. Let's see an example of that. Let me go back to Visual Studio Code and I will create a new component. Right click on src, new file, conditionals if.tsx, enter, and let's create our component, export default function conditionals if, and let me put a parenthesis here and I call the brackets here, and now I want to put this component in here. Let me put this here, and I can also remove all of these that we are not using anymore. We see that we have an error here because we need to say here return parenthesis and a fragment here. Now this is working and this is working also. So let's get started. So first let me say here conditionals if example, and what I want to do is the following. I want to have a select. I will say here select. With a select, as you may know, you can have several choices. For example, I can say options 1, and I can write options all the way through 3, 4, 5. I have 5 options here, and let me save so that you can see what this is about. Let me save here also. Let's go to here and I will refresh, and here as you can see we have this select control here. I can select 3, 4 or whatever. Now depending on the selection, I want to do something. So first let me put a span here. Actually let's use a div. I will say rate this website. Okay, so this is going to allow me to rate the website that we're doing. Now I want to say here on change equal to expression, and I can use an event here and I can put a value on each option. So value here 1, and I can do the same for each of the options because I will use the value, and I tend to prefer to use the value for retrieving what the user selected. Now let's write on the console what the user selected. I will say console log e.currentTarget.value, and let me delete this space. Let me save, and let's go back here, press F12, console, and let me say 3 for example. As you can see we have 3 here, or 5 for example, and this is working great. Now depending on the selection, I want to update the UI, which means that we need to use state variables. So let me say here const selected value, let's say selected rate, because this is a rating functionality. So let's say set selected rate equal to use state control dot to bring use state, and the default value is going to be 1. Now here I want to say set selected rate, and I want to say here e.currentTarget.value, but I need to parse this as an int. So let me say here parse int, and let me pass this eCurrentTarget.value, and let me use a radix of 10. And now I want to use an if. So below our select we're going to have a div, and in this div we are going to put a JSX expression, and although we are not allowed to say here if this then that, we can do a trick. We can use a function here like display result, and we can invoke that function, and we're going to create that function up here. Now the idea of this function is that this is the one that is going to have the if that we want to use. So I can say if selected rate equal to 1, then we can say something like no, else if selected rate equal to 2, and we can put whatever UI we want. We can say here a fragment, and we have to return this. We have to return here, and we have to return here, parentheses, because we want a complex expression. So here I can put, I don't know, maybe an input type text, and I can put an span here also and say, please tell us how to get better, and so on. Let me say else if selected rate equal to 3. Again, I can put an expression here and put whatever I want. I can even, let me come here, and I can even take one of the previous components that we did in the past, like simple, and put it here. Let's see that. Let's see that you can put simple here, the simple component, and I need to import simple from simple. And finally, let me put here an else for everything else, and I will say thanks. Okay, so we are good to go. As you can see here, we don't have any errors, and in here we have this if that is returning UI on each case of the value of the selected rate state variable. So let me save, and let's come back here, and I will refresh. And here, as you can see, we have 1, no. If I choose 2, we have please tell us how to get better. If I choose 3, then we have nothing, because here in 3 we forgot to say return, and also here we forgot to say return. Let me save, come back here, and now we have, in 3 we have the simple component. Remember that the simple component has hello world, and this is a subtext. So here we have hello world, and this is a subtext when the select has 3 selected. So if I choose 4, we get thanks. So as you can see, we can use an if combined with a function so that we can display multiple pieces of UI depending on the value of a variable, in this case, the selected variable. You can do the same for a switch. For example, here you can put your display result, and here you can use a switch, and it's exactly the same. In the previous video, we saw that we could use a select in order to list a list of options. Those options were the numbers from 1 all the way through 5. But this is not very efficient. What if we want to display the numbers from 1 to 20, for example? We would have to copy this and paste it and then edit it so that we have the numbers from 1 all the way to 20. That is not convenient and it is not practical. There is a better way, and it is by using the map function. With the map function, we remember that we can map the elements of an array into something, and in our case that something is going to be this UI that we have here. So let's do that. Let me create a new component for this example. Let me come here, right click on src, new file, and I will say map example.tsx, and I will say export default function map example. This will allow us to iterate over a collection and then display UI based on that iteration. Then I'm going to say return fragment and an h1 iteration example. So let me take this, let's go to index, and I will replace this with this and this here, and we're good to go. Now let's come here and let me take this select and let me paste it here, and we don't need this actually, so we can just have this console log. So let's get to work. So as I was saying, what we're going to do is that we're going to use the map function of arrays. So what I want to have is an array. Something that I can do is that I could do the following. I could do r equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is just an example. We are going to do something better in just a minute. But I just want to show you that I can delete this and then say an expression r map, and then I can map the value, which is a number, and then I'm going to say that I want to return something here, and that something is going to be the option. I'll say option here, an option here, and I will say value equal to, we shouldn't have to call this value, so I will just say number, just so we don't have value equal to value because it seems weird. So number here and number here, but this should be an expression because we want to evaluate this as the value that we are iterating, like 1, 2, 3, and so on. Now, we are missing something, but anyway, I will try to save everything and go to Google Chrome, and I will refresh. And as you can see, we have iteration example, and we have the numbers 1 all the way through 5. And if I select 4, and I press F12, we're going to see that indeed we have 4 here in the console, but we have this strange error message here. It says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. That is what I was telling you that we were missing from our solution. The thing is that, as I have mentioned several times already, React uses a virtual DOM that allows React to update the UI in an efficient manner. But since these options are generated dynamically, React has issues tracking this generated UI. This is dynamically generated UI. So we need to give React a little bit of help. And for that we can use key. With key, we will give a unique identifier to each of the generated options that we're going to generate. So here I have to put a unique value for each option. In our case, one value could be number, because in our case every number is different, right? And since they are different, then we can use them as the identifier of the generated options that we're generating using the map function. And that's actually it. With this I can save, and then I can come back here and I can refresh, and now as you can see we don't have any errors, and not only that, but our application still works. Now I was mentioning you that this is not good because I'm still writing the numbers from 1 to 5, so what I'm going to do is that I will use the array object because I want to fill an array, and I will say, for example, 100, so it is a big number. Then I will say fill because I am creating here an array with 100 elements, and I'm going to say that those elements are going to be 0. And now I have this array of 100 elements, and in here I cannot use number now, but I can use index. I will open a parenthesis here because I want a second parameter, which is index, and now I have number, which is the value of each element of the array. And let me write here that the array is composed of 0, so 0, 0, 0, all the way to the last 0. So I cannot use the number, but I can use the index. The index refers to the place of the value in the array. So for example, this first element is at index 0, this is at index 1, index 2, all the way to index 99. So something that I can do is to say index here, and I can say index here, and index here. And I can say +1 in each of them, just so that we are working with the values that we intended to work with, which are the numbers from 1 to 100. And that's it. Now I can save, and let's go back here, and I can refresh if I want to, though I don't think it was necessary. And I can click on here, and as you can see, we have the numbers from 1 to 100. I can select 100, and we have 100 here. I can select 82, and we have 82 here, and so on. So as you can see, we are using array map in order to generate repetitive UI using a single line. This is great when you want to display a list of elements to the user. And also we learned that we have to use key so that we help React identify each of the generated UI elements. So far, every time that I wanted to show you a new concept, I created a component and put all of the code in that component. For example, here we have the conditionals if component, which have some state, it has some functionality about what UI to display according to the selection of a select. Here we have a title, a div, a select, and also here is where we display the UI depending on the value selected on this select. So okay, we see that all of the code is here, but in real life, in real React applications, we don't usually do that. What we do is to create applications that use several components. The reason for that is that in that way, we are going to be able to reuse those components. For example, what if we want to reuse this select in different places in our application? One way would be to put the select in its own component, and then we only have to reference and use that component wherever we want to use the select. So let's do that in this video. What I want to do is to put this select in a component, but not only that, I want to be able to tell to that component how many numbers I want to display. So let's do that. First, I will create a new component, right click here, new file, and I will say conditionals if several components tsx, and then I will say here export default function conditionals if several components. This is a new version of the conditionals if example, just that in this case we are going to use several components. Let me copy everything from here and let's go back here and paste it, and then I will just cut this out, this select, and I will put it in its own component. So I will say here right click in src, new file, and I will say select number tsx, enter, export default function select number, return parentheses, and I will put this UI here. Now we don't have this set selected rate, so I will just delete it for now, and let's see what we have. Now I can come back to conditionals if several components, and here I can say select number, which is the component that we just created. Now we see that we have an error here because we need to import use state. Let me import this, and simple. Let me import simple. In order to import simple, I can just call on this and say simple here and simple here, and this is fine. Let's see that we can save everything, and I can copy this from here and go to index and change map sample and this and this. Now I can save and I can go back to Chrome and I can refresh here, and we have, let me close here, and we have the numbers 1 all the way through 5. And if I select 3, we can see that although the UI is not changing, that is normal, we still have that we're selecting the number 3. Though we said that we want to be able to tell to this select how many numbers to display. For that, we're going to use a parameter. Let's come here first to the select number component. And in order to define parameters, since we're using TypeScript, we're going to use the following way. We're going to say props here. And I want to define the shape of this parameter. What do I mean by that? I want to indicate what values I can receive through this select number function, because in the end this is a simple function. So let me say here select number props. This is just a nomenclature. You can choose whatever nomenclature you want, and here I will define an interface. You can again define the interface whatever you want, I'll just use it here. So select number props, and here I can say max value, and this is going to be a number. Now, what can I do with this? Well, now I can do the following. I can say the following. I can say here const r array, and here I can use props max value fill with zeros. This is something that we did in the past. And now I can delete this from here and use an expression r map, and I want to say nothing here, but here I want to say index, and then I want to generate option, and also here option, and I want to say key index plus 1 value index plus 1, and here expression index plus 1. And that's actually it. With this, our component will be able to display as many numbers as I want. Let's see an example of that. Let's come here, and we can see here that we have an error because this component needs the max value passed to it. So for that, I can say max value equal to, and I want to pass a number, for example 10. And now let me say Ctrl K S to save everything, and I can go back here, and now this select displays 10 numbers. And not only that, I told you that I can reuse this whenever I want. For example, I can copy this and I will just put it here below this div, and here I will say 15 and we'll save. And now let's go back here, and as you can see, we have two versions of our select component. Here I can select numbers all the way through 10, and here I can select numbers all the way through 15. So this is great. Now we made our select number functionality reusable. Now I can reuse this wherever I want, whenever I want. And there is no problem with that because now it is a component and we can reuse components throughout our application. Now let me delete this. Since this was just an example, I will put this back as 5, and now let's continue. Now let's see that our application is not working. Let me refresh, and if I select 3, for example, we can see that the UI is not getting updated. Why is that? Well, we need to find a way to communicate from the select number component to the conditionals if several components. I mean, we need to communicate from the shell component to the parent component. Let's see that next. In the previous video, we saw that we were able to create our own component which we were going to use as a shell component. And we saw that we could pass parameters to it. So we are in our parent component and we sent something into our shell component. Now we want to do the inverse. We want to be able to somehow send something from our shell component into our parent component. In React, we can do that in several ways. One of them is by passing a function as a parameter. So for example, we can pass this setSelectedRate to the select number component so that when the user selects a new number, we use this setSelectedRate to update this selectedRate state variable, which will update the UI displayed here. So let's do that. So we want to pass this function, and this function receives a parameter which is a number, right? Okay, so let's come here, and we see that we have props here, which are the parameters or properties that the component receives. So we have this interface which defines what values we can receive. Here we can put onSelected, which is just another parameter for this component. And what it is going to receive as a parameter, this function has to receive a parameter, right? And we just said that it was going to be a number. So I can say here value number, and we can return void. Why void? Because setSelectedRate returns void. So let's come back here, And now let's use this onSelected function that we're passing as a parameter. Let me come here and I will say, notice that we are on the onChange event of the select control. We're going to say onSelected. We have to say props onSelected, and I want to say parse int, and I want to pass e.currentTarget.value, comma 10 for the radix, and that's actually it. With this, we're good to go. From this component, we finish here. Now we are sending a value from the child component to the parent component using this onSelected function parameter that we're receiving here. Now let's go to the parent component and let me send this setSelectedRate as a parameter to my selectNumber component. So I will say onSelected equal to expression setSelectedRate. And that's actually it. Let me save everything and let's come back to Google Chrome and let me refresh the page. And if I click on here and select 2, you are going to see that now we are getting the UI updated. Same if I select 3, for example. So this is working because I am sending the setSelectedRate as a parameter to my child component, and in the child component we are invoking the setSelectedRate. We are passing the selected value, as you can see here, which is triggering this UI to be updated because here we are using the selectedRate state variable. Something else that we could have done is to use an anonymous function. For example, instead of just passing this, we can say here value and this. Now here I can do whatever I want. Maybe I want to do more stuff than just saying setSelectedRate. So here I can do setSelectedRate one more time, but if I want to do something else, I can do it this way. But in my case, since I don't want to do anything else that invoking setSelectedRate, I can abbreviate this into setSelectedRate, which is exactly the same. But in the previous way, we could do more when the onSelected event was raised. So as you can see, we have our selectNumber component, which receives several parameters like max value and onSelected. But what if I don't want to always have to set the value for this parameter max value that we have here? What if I want to do this and say that the 5 should be by default? Let's see that next. We know that we can create our own components, and we know that we can pass parameters to those components. Now, we would like to make some of those parameters optional. For example, here we have our selectNumber component, and if we go there, we are going to see that we have two parameters, max value and onSelected. I want to have max value configured in such a way that its value, not only it's optional, but that there is actually a default value for it. For that we can use default props. In order to use default props, we have to do the following. We have to say selectNumber, which is the name of the component, dot default props, and in here we can put an object which will have the default value of the parameters of the component. For example, I can say max value equal to 5, for example. And that's actually it. With this, now max value is an optional parameter because it has a default value. So if we go here, you can see that we no longer have an error. Let me save everything, Ctrl+K+S, and let's go back to Google Chrome. I will refresh, and as you can see, we only have 5 options here. And if I change this 5 for a 15, for example, and I save, and I come back here, and I see that we only have 5 yet, but if I refresh, now we have 15. So as you can see, this is working. And of course, if I come here and say max value, let's say equal to 6, for example, then this 6 is going to overwrite this 15 that we have here. Let me save and let's come back here. Let me refresh. And now let's see that we have 6 here. Therefore, we can now have optional parameters because they will have a default value by using default props in this manner. We are not limited to use it for max value. We could use it for unselected or any other parameter that is listed here in this interface.